Rocket launchers have been a staple of the weapon roster since all the way back in Borderlands 1, for the most part always being very simple. Small ammo pool, big damage, big AoE. The kind of weapon most of the time you'd keep on you just to whip out when you really needed it. Starting with Borderlands 3, rocket launchers were reclassified to Heavies, but what did this actually mean, and has their iterations in Borderlands 3 and now Borderlands 4 really redefined this class enough to earn a new name? What is up, my power bottoms? It's your boy Twunk Gunky, and let's talk about heavy weapons. As always in these videos, we'll start by talking about where Heavies started, of course being the rocket launcher classification that they had in BL1, BL2, and the pre-sequel. In Borderlands 1, rocket launchers were produced by Hyperion, Maliwan, Torg, and Vladov. They were characterized by generally slow fire rates, high damage explosive impacts, slow and frequent reloads, and being utterly fucking badass. But as cool as they were, generally rocket launchers were reserved for getting out a fight for your life or when needing a big burst of damage. They had an ammo pool of 72, the highest the mainline games have really seen, but despite this, the viability of full-on rocket launcher builds was pretty lacking. All characters could make use of rocket launchers, but really only Brick was able to only use rocket launchers, as he was able to buff up their damage significantly as well as regen ammo for them through his skills and class mods, more than the other Vault Hunters were able to. I think Roland was also somewhat viable in this department, but I don't think it was ever as popular. However, I'm not a Roland guy, so I could be totally wrong on that. Roland heads, feel free to strip my flesh from my bones. Doesn't change the fact that your goat forgot to put on a shield. This created a pretty big disparity between the best and worst users of rocket launchers, but also added to the uniqueness of Brick's class and possible build variety. It became one of his main draws, proving to be a pretty popular build archetype. Borderlands 2 is where I think rocket launchers really started carving themselves out as a proper and fully viable weapon class on their own. Many more manufacturers jumped on the rocket launcher train, now being Bandit, Maliwan, Tedior, Torg, and Vladov, as well as all of those, with exception to Torg, being able to roll as an E-Tech. But more than having a significant increase to their variety, a lot more Vault Hunters in 2 had synergy with rocket launchers, as well as there being many more ways of sustaining rocket ammo for all characters. Most notably, the Sham and the Big Boom Blaster for regenning ammo and stockpile relics for carrying more of it. The Sham also having particularly good synergy with the Logan's gun, allowing you to convert pistol ammo into rocket launcher ammo. That being said though, while launcher ammo regen was more plentiful, the actual pool was made significantly smaller, going from 72 to a max of 33 in BL2. Even despite that, rocket launchers were much more viable of a build archetype overall, but required very heavy investment. TPS was a very similar system and as such is a bit of a footnote here. 33 launcher ammo with the same manufacturers, Bandit being replaced by Stav. However, once again, the actual viability of a full rocket launcher build was a little bit more lacking than it was in 2, with only a couple characters having actual good synergies in their trees, and the only super helpful piece of gear to regenning ammo being the Sham. Although again, with the Logan's Dun returning in TPS, the Logan's Dun and the Sham was at least more than enough to sustain rocket ammo for most characters. It was definitely far better than BL1, not quite as good as BL2. A solid middle ground. So what defined rocket launchers while they were rocket launchers? As stated, the stats and their use cases were of course the biggest identifier. To reiterate, low ammo pool, high AoE, slower fire rate and reload speeds with frequent reloads, and big damage. For unique launchers, most often their effects focused on spreading damage in an area in fun and interesting ways. For most characters, rocket launchers were a panic button that you would swap to. However, what I also believe was a key trait that was explored best in BL2 was the ability to create a full playstyle out of them that, unlike the previous game, was an archetype available to all characters. That playstyle was often slower but with high impact and requiring a huge focus on ammo regen, with the rocket launcher itself being more so what gives you your damage. As long as you could sustain a launcher, you pretty much had a rocket launcher build. And I think this identity is core to the archetype, taking a stat that would usually be secondary or supportive to another playstyle and letting it be the sole thing that enables a build. So what happened when they got renamed to difference between self-harm and playing the first Descendant? That's right, absolutely nothing. Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna pretend for dramatic effect that there was really a substantial difference between these weapons being called rocket launchers and Heavies by Gearbox. For the most part, it was just a change in naming convention, one that I do believe came from an initially planned change in direction that wasn't fully committed to, because there are heavy weapons that don't fall into the traditional rocket launcher archetype. But before we talk about those exceptions, let's take a moment to talk about how I believe BL3 absolutely nailed the launcher archetype. The rocket manufacturers in 3 are COV stepping in to take over for Bandit and Scav, Torg, Vladoff, and Atlas. RIP Molly1, you will and have been sorely missed. The biggest change to rocket launchers is that the maximum launcher ammo pool is now a whopping 51. But with a lot of launchers, this ammo pool isn't as big as it seems. Many of the launchers in 3 have increased ammo costs, some going all the way up to 8 ammo per shot like the Rhino. I have a video yapping about this specific concept, but for many this is a point of balance and one that I think is well done with a few exceptions, like the ion cannon being nerfed to eat up 6 ammo per shot, which is reasonable for what that thing does, by the way. Issue is they did that before then introducing the kick charger, being a higher damage, easier to use ion cannon that only consumed 1 ammo per shot. But that's besides the point. BL3 has a lot of variance in ammo costs for these launchers, but most of the time it makes sense. This may initially seem that it means only a few select launchers that are both cheap and effective would make for a good launcher build, but this isn't the case. Nearly every single rocket launcher in 3 is viable to use as a main damage dealer as long as you have the ammo sustain for it, which nearly every Vault Hunter is capable of doing. A general rule of thumb is that the higher the area coverage of a launcher in 3, the higher the ammo cost. This means to clear a mobbing area, you'll need far less shots from an expensive weapon like the Hive versus a cheaper weapon like the Freeman. Therefore, the ammo you need to be able to sustain ends up evening out and carving out more niches and strengths between weapons within the class while still keeping all of them quite viable. While ammo sustain in 3 is a bit weaker across the board for rocket launchers than it was in 2 due to these increased costs, launchers themselves are just far more viable without as much sustain. However, they become even stronger and allow you to utilize stronger and higher AoE weaponry when you do have that sustain. This all comes together to create almost different subclasses of launchers within the single weapon class and even within the manufacturers, functioning differently and having different build requirements depending on the value that you wish to get out of them. Remember that. That is going to be an important concept for the end. Now let's talk about those heavies that don't quite fit the usual launcher weapon type. The Shredda, a COV launcher that fires out explosive saw blades that roll along the ground, and the Chukka, also a COV launcher, but this one acts as a low-range flamethrower. Both of these act and feel very different from your traditional launcher, but I want to focus more on the Chukka. Outside of being a COV launcher and therefore kinda just sucking by default, the Chukka suffers heavily from the lack of an ammo pool. It is a flamethrower dealing constant and consistent damage, and therefore chugging through a steady stream of your limited launcher ammo. The Chukka does truly deserve the title of a heavy weapon rather than a launcher, but it is trapped within an outdated launcher-focused system. So what's a system that could open it up to working better? I do not like Borderlands 4's Ordnance system. However, I think it's on the right track towards a proper heavy weapon system, and it has a lot of merit to it in that. So let's go over what this system is, how it works, and why it's both good and bad. In BO4, heavy weapons and grenades were merged into the Ordnance system, a single slot where you can equip either a grenade or a heavy which refreshes on a cooldown. The ammo each grenade or heavy weapon has is determined by the grenade or weapon itself and refreshes on a cooldown. For heavies, this cooldown refreshes the entire ammo pool, while for grenades it refreshes one at a time. Heavies in 4 are very diverse, feeling much closer to what I had expected with the name change to heavies in 3. Some still feel like normal launchers like the Molly1 Energy Orb or either of the Torgs, but there's things that fire high accuracy energy bolts, spinning frisbee saw blades, and full-on Gatling guns. This is fucking awesome, and I really enjoy the different types of heavies that 4 provides. Design-wise, I think they nailed it. I kinda just wish there was more. Why they're able to do this and why this works is because heavies aren't sharing a single limited ammo pool. With a pool of 51 like in 3, you would never be able to have a Gatling gun heavy weapon and make it viable. The cooldown system allowing for each weapon to have a different ammo pool allows for this much higher variation in function, which is great. But despite that, heavy builds in Borderlands 4 are much more lacking and much more restrictive. They are completely viable and you can use heavy weapons as your main damage dealers, but they are much less versatile. This was an issue in Wonderlands with the melee weapon slot, and it's a problem with 4 in the Ordnance weapon slot. Only having one means that you are at a disadvantage versus traditional gun builds. Unless you want to be perpetually swapping on the fly, which the cooldown makes next to impossible to do in 4, you are stuck using one weapon for the duration of your encounter. Along with that, you have no option to use grenades alongside your heavies, which while currently, as of recording this, Borderlands 4 is a little bit lacking in the utility grenade department, there is still a couple that would be fantastic to be able to use alongside your heavy weapons. And the fact that you're able to use those grenades alongside your actual normal weapons, it kinda just goes to further make heavies feel worse. Along with that, there are so many actions that you can perform in this game that will just cancel you out of your heavy and put it on cooldown, such as swapping weapons, mantling, grappling, entering fight for your life, using a rep kit, activating some action skills, and probably a hell of a lot more that I missed. This all sucks, especially in the first entry to properly introduce such variants in heavy weapon types. This creates a very cool, very diverse set of weapons that likely a majority of the player base will never interact with on a deep level because the system itself limits you to only using one at a time. And that's not even getting into the mess that Ordnance heavies provide on the more technical side of build crafting, because Gearbox cannot figure out whether or not these actually are guns or not. So how do we start? One more time, let me just quickly reiterate what I believe is the core to heavy weapons themselves and their builds, and the things about them that I most like and would want preserved, as well as all the problems that I would like to solve. Heavies should always be very high impact. When you pull out a heavy, you mean business. Whether built to primarily use them or using them as a last resort, when the heavy comes out, a lot of things are going to die. Heavies should always result in a high point of your gameplay and should generally be the peak point of your weaponry. The weapon cost balancing is absolutely core here. Having an entire weapon type where ammo conservation or sustain is key to utilizing it effectively is very unique and precisely what allows for heavies to be as strong as they are. This should always be the focus when trying to build for heavies, with the damage mostly being provided by them while you need to find a way to sustain that limited pool. And with this, I believe that having the ability to utilize heavies as a full build archetype is incredibly important. Not only is this ammo sustain focus very interesting to build and conceptualize around, but it's just incredibly fun. It shouldn't be easy to build around heavies, and it should require very high investment into, but it should absolutely be kept in mind when designing this class of weapons. So with these 3 pillars of heavy design, let's get into the system that I've come up with. Heavies return to being similar to all previous iterations prior to 4, just being a usual weapon type using a single ammo pool. You can slot them into any of your 4 weapon slots in any amount with no restrictions there. I feel that this is important to keeping that archetype feeling good and consistent with other weapon types, and something that really gets lost with the Ordnance system. It also allows for more experimentation, keeping up with elemental coverage, and just being able to give yourself more options in general. But similar to the Ordnance system, heavies now use a variable ammo pool. It is a single ammo type, heavy weapon ammo, but the cap of this pool is much higher. I'm thinking somewhere around 300 kind of higher, if not more. But we'll use 300 as a base here, since I think 3 mags of a 100 round chain gun type weapon sounds reasonable, and 300 is a nice round number. Of course, the numbers here aren't that thought out, and the main focus here is just the concept and idea. So you have a Vladof double barrel chain gun in your hands. Your mag size is 100 with a total pool of 300. You then swap to a Torg launcher. Upon swapping, despite still using your heavy weapon ammo, that pool dynamically updates to a total of 50 and your mag size is 6 at 1 ammo cost per shot. This is why I wanted a round number to illustrate. This might sound a bit complicated at first, but if our base ammo pool is the highest value possible, then it's just a matter of ammo cost and visually dividing for ease of understanding on the front end. Effectively, that Vladov chain gun is consuming 1 ammo per shot while the Torg launcher is consuming 6. So we just divide everything by 6 when that weapon type is in hand, and boom, you have 2 heavy weapons with completely different functionality that exists in the same weapon class and uses the same ammo pool. No new slot, no weird cooldown shenanigans, simple, easy, and versatile. This also allows for ammo regen to affect these different heavy types differently. They would all still be limited, but a higher fire rate weapon will still be able to have faster ammo regen than a launcher would. All you'd have to do is have ammo regen be based on the post-division number that you get for your mag size or ammo pool or whatever. For example, calling back to the BL3 Chukka, a huge issue that weapon had was that it was consuming launcher ammo way too fast without a big enough mag to be able to effectively regen that ammo as quick as it was consumed. If the Chukka had a bigger mag, sustaining ammo with usual regen would be a lot more doable. It's still quite limited for if you aren't built to sustain, keeping that identity intact, but this variable pool keeps the ammo sustain focus available for differently functioning weapons. The only potential problem I immediately think of with a system like this is that there would be some required rounding. If your chain gun has 79 ammo in a mag for a total of 279, swapping to a launcher leaves you with 46.5. But I mean, Borderlands is really no stranger to rounding and already gives you free ammo if you fire a gun that takes 6 ammo per shot while you only have 1 shot left in your pool. So I think if you just have it always round up, that would be fine. Even if it's like 46.1, I think rounding up is probably just how you avoid the most confusion, and again, I don't think it would really be that big of a deal. Now with that system laid out, let's quickly go over a couple. This section is almost entirely just for fun and to kind of give an idea of some ways that this system could be used to make some really cool and really interesting weaponry. Of course, I'm not going to be giving super in-depth details on these weapon types, just kind of my ideas for how they could work. As well, I'm going to just kind of skip over anything that would likely be the same. For example, Atlas, I don't really have any other ideas for other than how their rocket launchers worked in 3. I think they were very cool and really well designed. And while I was coming up with ideas for other manufacturers, I just couldn't really think up anything for them. Same with Tediore, but that's more so just because I'm not a huge fan of Tediore as is. Anyways, starting out here with Vladov, of course, as I mentioned before, you could have that double chain gun having a 300 max ammo pool. This is kind of something that exists in BL4, and in that, I think it's just really fucking fun, provably. This would have a very high fire rate, having projectiles that will pierce somewhat through enemies for taking out hordes, slightly increased crit damage, and having the fire rate increase a little bit as you fire up to a cap. Up next, in another 300 max ammo pool, having a mountable turret. This one is for all my old school Tachanka mains. This would be very similar to the double chain gun, but having a slightly lower fire rate and a higher base damage. When deployed, it would have a front-mounted shield as well as gives damage resistance to the players that are actively inside of it, since this would keep you completely stationary while using. This would kind of be very similar to like Moses' Daka Bear. At a 50 max ammo pool, Vladov could also have a high fire rate rocket launcher, pretty much being identical to the BL2 Vladov launchers. Lesser splash radius, much higher rate of fire than a usual launcher. Man, I miss these things. And finally, again at 50, a mortar launcher, which is pretty much the BL3 mortar underbarrel that they already have, but just put into an actual weapon type of its own, because man do I love these things, and the Ivan's Red Eye Rocket Pod is one of my favorite launchers ever. These would project a targeting reticle onto the ground wherever these would land, and have projectiles that would fly up into the sky before arcing back down onto that target. These would also have a very large splash radius. For Torg, of course, Torg would have a hell of of a lot of rocket launchers, but as for a more unique option, I think having a grenade launcher at a 50 max ammo pool would be incredibly fun. This would fire out lower splash radius arcing grenades that could either explode on impact or bounce once before exploding depending on the firing mode. This would also have a higher fire rate. COV at 150 of course would have a flamethrower, very similar to the BL3 Chukka, being low range and dealing constant damage to anything caught within the flames. Honestly, there's probably a lot that you can do with COV, but I think they've kind of experimented with a lot of what they could do with COV, and I kind of like what they did. Both the horizontal and vertical saw blade throwers have been very cool to see in both BL3 and BL4 with COV and Ripper respectively, and there's probably tons of possible options that you could do with this manufacturer to make some really fun and really brutal contraptions. For Mollywan, at a 100 ammo pool, you have a laser beam, being a fully auto, constantly ticking damage laser beam that fires out at a pretty long range, but the beam gets less stable the further out it is. This will have increased crit damage and damage that increases the longer that you fire, but the recoil gets stronger and stronger, making it overall less and less controllable. This was very heavily inspired by the Ghostbusters proton gun. For Jacobs, both of these have a 50 max ammo pool. The first is a cannonball launcher, firing out heavily arcing, very slow projectiles that fire out at an upward angle before arcing back down. They're explosive on impact, but also have very high knockback to them. And the Jacobs Ballista, firing out a slower moving projectile, which will start arcing towards the ground as it flies through the air. This will have very high crit damage and will pierce through enemies pretty heavily. And finally here for Hyperion, at a 50 max ammo pool, you have a railgun, having a very low initial accuracy, but allowing you to charge to increase accuracy and damage up to a cap, which you can then release to fire. This would have very high pierce, very high accuracy, high crit damage, but no splash radius. And finally, at a 10 ammo pool total, the orbital laser. Huge AoE, massive damage in that area, but it takes time to arrive after calling in. And of course, being splash, you better get the fuck out of that zone after you call it in. But I did not just stop at manufacturers in general, because I also got carried away a little bit and came up with some ideas for uniques. For a Torg grenade launcher, I came up with the counterfeit, firing out copies of your equipped grenades rather than just a generic grenade projectile. This would only have a 30 max ammo pool though. The Shoop being a Mollywan laser, where you can hold to charge and then release to fire out a very large laser beam blast with high recoil. This will pierce through enemies until it hits a surface. The Boot, a Jacobs Ballista, that will fire out snakes, live snakes. They don't go very far, but the snakes will hunt down nearby enemies and bite them, dealing corrosive damage with a high chance at applying a corrosive dot. The Supply Beacon being a Hyperion orbital laser, this would have two firing modes, healing and resupply. Both have a very long cooldown to them. The healing firing mode will drop a long-lasting AoE healing zone at the called-in location, while resupply will drop a huge piping hot load of ammo for all weapon types. And finally, the Scorpio, a Vladov mountable turret, but this one is non-mountable. It deploys out an auto turret with a wider front shield that absorbs incoming damage and will draw some aggro to it. But yeah, that's gonna about do it for this video. What do you guys think about heavy weapons, or rocket launchers as they were previously called? Do you miss when they were a generic weapon type like me? Do you enjoy the new Ordnance system? Do you have other ideas of your own of how they could work, or other fun concepts that could be made with this sort of system? I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, definitely consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, all that. I'll be live right after this video goes up, right here on YouTube and also over on my Twitch channel, where there'll be a link to down in the description below, and just under that is a link to my Discord server where you can come and join and hang out. But with that all being said, I hope to see you guys in the next one.